So thank you very much for inviting me today. I would really like to thank the National Biodiversity Data Centre and Limerick City and County Council for the kind invitation to speak here today and really to provide knowledge exchange at this biodiversity conference. So today on the screen you can see the things that I'm going to talk about. So the main thing I'm going to talk about is Council's pollinator plan, and this is aligned to the All Ireland pollinator plan, and this was an action from the Doherty and Strand Green Infrastructure Plan. We've heard a bit about green infrastructure over the last couple of days, but I will go into a wee bit more detail about what that is. I'll also present how I worked on a knowledge exchange project, and this is with Causeway Coast and Glens Councils, so along the north coast of Northern Ireland, and this was to extend the Don't Mow, Let It Grow project to our district. And in addition, I will discuss how I incorporated natural capital accounting and carbon savings to show the additional benefits of managing council-owned green spaces for pollinators. So on the screen you can see the different types of policies and legislation that were associated with this. So to give a bit of context, in Northern Ireland in 2011, the Wildlife and Natural Environment Act was introduced, and this introduced a statutory biodiversity duty for all public bodies in Northern Ireland to further the conservation of biodiversity associated with their functions, and this applied to local authorities. So Council have been assisting with the delivery of the Northern Ireland Biodiversity Strategy, managing our estate and ensuring that our functions further the conservation of biodiversity to meet our statutory biodiversity duty. And recently, we developed the Doherty and Strand Green Infrastructure Plan 2019 to 2032. And this was to proactively assist our partners to manage the district at a landscape scale. And this was to ensure that public green and blue spaces are connected and resilient, to prevent biodiversity loss and to address climate change. So managing large-scale areas for habitats and species is often referred to as nature recovery networks, which can allow the restorations of ecosystems at scale over the long term. And so ideally, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan provides detailed action plans for different sectors across the island to address the potential extinction of 1/3 of our bee population. And by adopting this landscape scale approach, we can use the pollinator plan to create nature recovery networks across the district in Doherty, further afield and across the island for pollinators. And so collectively, the policies on the screen and the legislation in Northern Ireland contribute towards achieving the national UK government's policy of nature positive by 2030. And also the policies help to deliver on a global scale the UN international agreements to address climate change and biodiversity loss. So that kind of sets the scene of where we were going. This is our green infrastructure plan. And just to give a bit of information for people who are maybe not familiar with the term, green infrastructure is an interconnected network of green and blue spaces which provide a range of environmental, social and economic functions. And these range from green spaces, these are vegetated areas, so these are things like woodlands, allotments, parks, greenways and cemeteries. And blue spaces are water features, and they include things like rivers, reservoirs, lakes and canals. And many of these sites can perform several functions simultaneously, and this is known as multifunctionality. So that means they can perform economic, social, and environmental functions at the same time. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So for example, under environmental functions, these include measures to increase the connectivity between green spaces for people and wildlife, and also to value the ecosystems that we receive, ecosystem services that we receive for free from nature. So this includes things like air quality, water quality, pollination and carbon storage, which is discussed at great extent over the last day. So with the review of public administration in 2015 in Northern Ireland, councils acquired in Northern Ireland new duties, and this included things like planning and community planning, but also as well, there was a lot of councils. There was 26 councils, and they've now been reduced down to 11. And so this provided us with an opportunity for enhanced partnership working to address local issues. So we'd established a green infrastructure stakeholder group, which comprised members from the public, private and community sectors, but vitally, which had public accessible green and blue spaces the public could access. And we developed a green infrastructure framework, which was a roadmap for the creation of a green infrastructure plan for the district, as one had never been created in Northern Ireland before. Subsequently, we developed the Green Infrastructure Plan 2019 to 2032 and developed the associated action plan, and it has 184 actions, which are very ambitious over the short, medium and long term to 2032. So on the screen you can see that we have 4 key strategic themes, which are people and place, economic prosperity, biodiversity and climate change. And vitally, we have 3 cross-cutting themes, which are communication and engagement, health and wellbeing and natural capital. And an action under the biodiversity key strategic theme from the plan was to develop a council pollinator plan. And this was using the green infrastructure approach. We're using the landscape scale. And so obviously, we all are aware of the pollinator plan and the aims to pollinate crops and wild plants to manage the land with a joined-up network of flower-rich habitats on a large scale. And this involved reviewing our large 800-hectare estate and creating a network of sites across the district to connect to adjoining districts, working at a landscape scale with our partners. So the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan provided detailed how-to guides for different sectors to help pollinators thrive and survive. And Council used this excellent guidance from the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan to develop our first action plan for the district. And this really is a fantastic resource. During COVID, I've been travelling around the island on my holidays, and I can see the pollinator plan in lots of places, from Buncrana Medical Centre, and it is shown in Donegal, to Ahenry Castle. It's everywhere. It's really, really taken off, and it's great to see. And we provide a lot of advice to other organisations on how to develop locally themselves. And subsequently, we developed a new council pollinator plan that over the last year, aligned to the relevant objectives and actions of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan 2021 to 25. And the main objective associated with this council pollinator plan is Objective 2, making public land pollinator friendly. We are taking practical action to protect biodiversity by selecting large council-owned park sites which can accommodate large areas, so anything above a hectare in size, to create food and homes for bees, while balancing as a public authority green space provision for recreation like picnics and football. So it's very important that we're not taking over the whole site, because then we'll get a backlash from the public. So it's creating space for people and for wildlife. So we've provided an opportunity to create a network of green spaces, connected habitats which can provide food and shelter for a range of pollinators. And the map on the screen shows in the Derry City area 11 large council-owned green spaces which had a pilot change in grass management since 2020, and this was initially 25 hectares of wildflower meadows. This is a map of the district, and it shows that building upon the success of the pilot in 2020, we had the opportunity to extend the programme to 23 cemeteries across the district in 2021. And this involved reducing grass cutting on a total of 30 hectares, which is about 4% of our estate, which equates to about 42 football pitches worth of wildflowers for bees at a landscape scale. So the Don't Mow, Let It Grow is a best practice example of project development developed by Causeway Coast and Glens Council. And this pilot project aimed to change the management of amenity grassland by creating wildflower meadows. And this involved using the seeds in the soil bank to grow, flower and set their seed for the following year to create a sustainable wildflower meadow. Subsequently, the grass would be cut and lifted in late summer to prevent thick grass that hinder wildflower growth the following year. So I participated in a knowledge exchange project with Causeway Coast ground maintenance section, really to get detailed knowledge on the ground, to view their machinery, discuss the grass cutting options and view their meadow management. And their pilot provided valuable information for our council to make an informed decision to invest in a new special cut and lift lawnmower in 2020. So I worked with our own council's ground maintenance section to select the sites to create the 30 hectares of wildflower meadows as part of our Don't Mow, Let It Grow campaign. So to create 34 green spaces and cemeteries as part of this. And this really involved changing regularly cut amenity grassland. And we wouldn't believe that we were cutting 15 times a year at these sites, because we always did. And now that's reduced to 1 or 2 cuts a year. All these sites where we have the wildflower meadows have been marked with Don't Mow Yet signage, as shown on the screen. Prior to cutting and lifting the grass, I personally go out and I conduct meadow surveys, pollinator surveys, logistical surveys to assess the effectiveness of the meadow management and to plan the cut and lifting of the meadows. And this is really important. We heard a lot yesterday about monitoring and at the roundtable discussions. This project has been successful, but there has been some valuable lessons along the journey. The challenges include ensuring widespread annual media coverage to remind the public of the rationale for this change in grass management. Also, to commence cutting and lifting in the second week of August and to extend to early October. This is to allow the 34 sites to be cut and lifted in the event that we experience prolonged wet weather conditions that could hinder a grass cutting in that season. And last winter, we experienced very mild weather and significant grass growth. Therefore, to address this challenge, some sites will have to have an additional spring cut and lift to prevent thatch in the summer and to allow flowers to grow and minimise the volume that needs to be removed in late summer. And it's always important to review and make these changes so that the project doesn't fail because we have some initial teething problems. In addition, the machinery is prone to wear and tear. For example, the wheels aren't suitable to travel long distances on the road network. You've seen our map of the district. So we invested in the second machine with one in Derry and a second one in the wider Strabane area. And this is to minimise transporting the lawnmower long distances and also prevent it being regularly in our garage and out of service. So working in partnership with adjacent local authorities, we've collectively had the opportunity to create a landscape scale approach of 100 hectares of wildflower meadows for pollinators in the northwest. So this is across Mid-Ulster, Causeway Coast and Glens, Fermanagh and Omagh, and Derry and Strabane council districts. Council have raised awareness of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan with our own pollinator plan, Don't Mow, Let It Grow initiative with details on our biodiversity section on our website. We've developed an eco-zone for schools on our webpage to provide advice on pollinators. We also promote it on radio interviews annually. We issue annual press releases, photo calls. We install the signage on our sites and participate in a TG Cahir documentary about action for pollinators. We've created an animation video to encourage people to create their own wildflower meadows across the district by using the native seed bank. And I promote this through engagement with consultants and contractors who come to us for advice on large infrastructure projects. For example, Heron Brothers recently have signed up as a pollinator partner to take action on managing invasive species. And I recommend this approach to all our green infrastructure stakeholders who are starting to make changes on their own estate, work with community groups, businesses, schools and sports clubs. And I provide online presentations to other local authorities across Ireland to provide knowledge exchange as well, basically discussing with them not just the benefits for changes in grass management for pollinators, but also the importance of surveying, natural capital, carbon saving calculations, also cost savings and key actions to help biodiversity conservation. So natural capital is a cross-cutting theme from the Green Infrastructure Plan, which I introduced earlier, and it describes components of the natural environment, including green spaces, that provides economic benefits for people. Natural assets provide a range of ecosystem services that can be valued, and these benefits can include cleaner air and water, improved physical health, mental health and well-being, carbon storage, temperature regulation, and flood risk regulation. And natural capital accounting is an approach to estimating the economic benefits provided by green spaces, in particular public health, well-being and carbon storage. And the slide on the screen shows several natural green and blue infrastructure assets and the benefits that we derive from these assets. For example, the vital role of pollinators. Also, research has shown that people feel better when they're surrounded by nature, and the creation of our 30 hectares of wildflower meadows on Council's estate will increase biodiversity, but importantly boost mental health when taking a walk beside these meadows. And I've developed a natural capital account for Council's own estate and the wider district, which was an action from our Green Infrastructure Plan. And this highlighted that there are 9,000 hectares of public accessible green spaces within our district, which provide £89 million per annum in prevented mental health benefits for the public and for the health service, and £48 million per annum in terms of prevented physical health issues for individuals and for the NHS. In addition, our woodlands, that's public accessible woodlands, store 30,000 tonnes of carbon annually. So that's quite significant. And just a bit of background, because people might be interested in how we did this. So what we did was we developed the natural capital account by calculating the woodland coverage, so that's in hectares, across the district in public, owned and accessible green spaces. We looked at the number of visitors to our sites, and using counters and also doing surveys. And also use pointer information, which is a GIS pointer data information for each household in the district. And this was provided to a consultant, Vivid Economics, who inputted this information into their Greenkeeper model. And this really helped provide us with vital information, particularly for the development of our local development plan, in terms of provision for open space. And this helped highlight that 99% of the population in the Derry city area, that's in the city centre area, not the wider district, were within 1 kilometre of public accessible green space, and that's 97% for the Strabane area, so that's very significant. It's well above the average. Sorry. I've also extended this research to include the benefits associated with changes in grass management on our estate. So the natural capital value of changing 30 hectares of amenity grassland to species-rich grassland was calculated using FTEX, that's a consultant's economic appraisal for grassland management for Causeway Coastal Glen's initial pilot project for Don't Mow, Let It Grow. And they estimate the annual value is £238 per hectare for the benefits of improved management of moving grassland from amenity grassland to species-rich grassland under the project. So that equates to just over £7,200 per annum in natural capital value for our 30 hectares of species-rich grassland on Council's estate. An added benefit associated with changing in grass management makes significant cost savings for Council. This is not the main reason why we did this. The initial reason was for pollinators, but it is also an added benefit for us. And what it does is enable our staff to be redeployed in our ground maintenance sections to complete other vital ground maintenance activities between April and July to take key actions to help biodiversity conservation. So building upon the natural capital work, I developed a methodology to calculate the carbon savings associated with reduced grass cuttings from 15 cuts to 1 or 2 cuts a year across our 30 hectares estate. And this reduces Council's carbon emissions by 2 tonnes of carbon a year. This makes the assumption that 2 litres of petrol are required to cut 1 hectare of grass. This is using DEFRA's calculations. This emits DEFRA, in case anybody's not aware who that is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. That's the body, the regulator in England. And they calculate this emits 2.3 kilograms of carbon dioxide per hectare. And this is using their greenhouse gas report and conversion factors. And this information is really useful for assessing the carbon footprint of operations. For example, at Bay Road Park Local Nature Reserve, which Council own and manage, we've saved around 200 kilograms of carbon a year by reducing grass cutting across our 3.3 hectare of the site. So the site is larger, but this is the section that we create for wildflowers, from 15 to 2 cuts a year. Therefore, this is really useful information for reviewing Council operations to improve sustainability, meet our biodiversity duty to further the conservation of biodiversity by improving ecosystem services and to meet the UK climate target of net zero by 2050. Also, this is a really simple, practical operational example of how councils can reduce their carbon emissions and help implement their council climate plans. And I've heard a lot from people who are saying they're really overwhelmed by what can they do in terms of climate actions and biodiversity actions. And this is a huge win for both, but also as well, it's really helpful for organisations and particularly local authorities who can make a huge difference by making a simple change in their operationals. Building upon the research that Causeway Coastal Glen's and Derry and Strabane councils have done, we've been working with Belfast City Council, who are commissioning further research into the carbon storage associated with wildflower meadows. And they're going to highlight the below-ground storage associated with changes in grass management. And this will show the benefits of managing local authority estates for pollinators and the carbon storage potential of species-rich grassland habitats versus amenity grassland. And this will demonstrate the valuable ecosystem services provided by council-owned estate. So it's really looking at the storage below ground of carbon by looking at the differences by regularly mown grassland and wildflower meadows. And I just wanted to pick up on something that Bernadette had touched on earlier in her presentation. It is possible as well to look at restoration of habitats. We recently did some surveys of Lough Foyle, where we have green spaces adjacent to it, and we've started to see for the first time last year Zosteria seagrasses recovering in this area, which is fantastic because Lough Foyle is designated an SPA. So it's great for the overwintering birds, but also as well for the carbon storage capacity. So it's great to see, and that's something that we would like to work on in the future as well, to see the carbon storage associated with that. So by adopting a landscape scale approach to our grassland management, we've managed to create a network of species-rich grasslands for pollinators at 11 large parks and 23 cemeteries across the district. And working in partnership across adjacent councils in Northern Ireland, we've collectively created 100 hectares worth of wildflower meadows across the region. And we manage these green spaces to create spaces for people and wildlife by identifying areas of amenity grassland for recreation, which is vital during COVID, as Council's 800-hectare estate attracted 6.5 million visitors in 2020, and identifying opportunities to create 30 hectares of species-rich grasslands for pollinators. And using a natural capital approach, we've identified the additional ecosystem services provided by this change in grass management, with over 7,000 a year for pollinators. And also by calculating the reduction in carbon footprint of 2,000 tonnes per annum from a change in grass management of cutting operations, it provides a very valuable and simple example of how changing a council operation can have multiple sustainable benefits for biodiversity, climate, health and well-being. Council's pollinator plan at a local level contributes to achieving the national UK government's policy on nature positive by 2030. It helps to deliver on a global scale the UN international agreements to address climate change and biodiversity loss. And the adoption of our green infrastructure approach to manage our grasslands at a landscape scale will create a nature recovery network to contribute towards the delivery of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, to reverse the decline in pollinators, and it's a best practice example of a green infrastructure project delivering for biodiversity, climate change, public green spaces, food, health and well-being. And the ecosystem services provided by this plan will include the pollination of our local food growth, health and wellbeing benefits for our residents, carbon storage and reduction in our carbon emissions. Thank you very much.